Picture this. The year is 71 after Christ. You're the king of Judea. Or you were. Right now, you're standing in the Circus Maximus watching your 16-year-old daughter walk past in chains. Around you, 50,000 Romans are screaming. They're not screaming at her. They're screaming for her. You can't move. You can't speak. Iron manacles cut into your wrists. Your daughter's name is Berenice. 3 days ago, she was a princess. She wore purple silk and gold jewelry that took craftsmen months to create. Now she's wearing nothing but a thin tunic that barely covers her body. This is a Roman triumph, the greatest spectacle in the ancient world. And your daughter isn't just a prisoner. She's a prize. Here's what most people don't understand about Roman triumphs. They weren't just military parades. They were systematic displays of domination designed to break both the conquered and the conqueror's enemies psychologically. And the daughters of kings, they served a very specific purpose. If you believe that the documented records of history's most terrifying systematic practices must be remembered, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support helps uncover the accounts that textbooks deliberately buried. Let me take you back to where this machine was designed. The year is 241 before Christ. Rome has just won the First Punic War. A Roman general named Lucius Catulus is planning the first triumph in over a decade. He has a problem. The defeated Carthaginian commander escaped. There are no high-ranking prisoners to display, but there are daughters, sisters, wives of Carthaginian nobles. According to the historian Polybius, Catulus made a decision that would shape Roman policy for the next 500 years. The women wouldn't just be displayed, they would be examined. Think about what that word meant in Roman context. Examined, inspected, evaluated, not for ransom, not for diplomatic exchange, for what the Romans called dignitas assessment. Here's what that actually meant. Roman officials would evaluate conquered royal women for 3 specific qualities: youth, beauty, virginity. The ones who met all 3 criteria were separated from the others. They weren't taken to prisons. They weren't taken to slave markets. They were taken to a specific facility that the Romans called the Atrium Vestae, the House of Assessment. Archaeological excavations beneath the Roman Forum in 1893 discovered something that changed our understanding of Roman conquest. A series of chambers with distinctive features. Small rooms, heavy doors with locks on the outside, stone benches built into walls, and scratched into the stone in multiple languages: Punic, Greek, Aramaic, Egyptian, hundreds of names with ages. Juliana, 14 years, daughter of Hasdrubal, Arsinoe. 16 years, sister of Ptolemy, Roxana. 15 years, niece of Tigranes. The pattern was chilling. Almost all between 14 and 18 years old. Almost all identified as daughters or sisters of royalty. These weren't slave quarters. This was a holding facility for what the Romans called the sponsalia victoriae, the bridal assessment. Here's what should terrify you. This wasn't random cruelty. This was policy, documented, systematic, maintained for centuries. Let me show you how the machine worked. Act 1. The triumph would begin at dawn. Prisoners would be lined up outside the city walls in specific order. Men of military age at the front, children and elderly at the back one, and in the middle, women and girls between 12 and 25 years old. A specific group of Roman officials called the triumviri nuptialis, the 3 marriage commissioners, would walk the line. They carried wax tablets. They took notes. Contemporary accounts from Livy describe the process. The commissioners would stop at each woman, ask her name, ask her father's name, ask her age. Then they would make a mark on their tablets, a simple symbol, a circle for yes, a line for no. You're standing there watching this happen to your daughter. You know what the circle means. The historian Appian records a specific incident from 146 before Christ. After the destruction of Carthage, 17 daughters of Carthaginian senators were marked with circles. Their fathers were forced to watch as guards separated them from the other prisoners. One father, a man named Hasdrubal, tried to intervene. He broke free from his chains and threw himself at the commissioners. Roman guards beat him unconscious in front of his daughter. She was 15 years old. Then they took her anyway. Think about the psychology of that moment. You're her father. You're supposed to protect her. That's your entire identity as a man in ancient society. And you can't do anything. Worse, your attempt to save her just proved to everyone watching that you're completely powerless. That's not random violence. That's calculated humiliation. Act 2. The display. The selected women would be taken to the atrium vestae before the actual triumph began. They would be bathed. Their hair would be arranged in a specific style, the nodus herculeus, a complex knot that Roman brides wore. They would be dressed in white tunics, the same tunics Roman brides wore. Then, as the triumph procession moved through Rome's streets, these women would walk in a specific position. Not with the other prisoners, not with the captured weapons. They walked directly behind the conquering general's chariot. 50,000 Romans lining the streets would see them, and they would understand exactly what they were seeing. These weren't prisoners of war. These were potential brides, available, on display. The historian Plutarch describes the reaction of the crowd during Julius Caesar's triumph in 46 before Christ, after conquering Egypt. When Cleopatra's younger sister Arsinoe walked past, the crowd didn't jeer. They appraised her. Like livestock, Plutarch records that men in the crowd shouted out assessments. Good hips for bearing sons, hair like gold, young enough to train properly. Arsinoe was 17 years old. You're forced to walk in the procession. You're watching thousands of Roman men evaluate your daughter's body, and you know what comes next. Because after the public display came the private assessment. Act 3. The examination. Here's where the documentation becomes fragmentary and disturbing. Roman writers mention the process in passing, like it's too obvious to explain in detail. But when you piece together references from Livy, Tacitus, Pliny, and later sources, a pattern emerges. After the triumph ended, the selected women would be taken to specific chambers in the atrium vestae. They would be examined by matrons, older Roman women, specifically appointed for this task. The examination had a specific purpose: verify virginity, assess fertility, evaluate docility. Think about what that meant in practice. You're a 15-year-old princess. 3 days ago, you lived in a palace. Now you're in a locked room while Roman strangers examine your body to determine your value. The process wasn't quick. Multiple sources suggest it took several days. The women would be isolated, examined repeatedly, and evaluated for what Romans called matrimonial potential. Here's what makes this especially sinister. The entire process was documented. Names, ages, kingdoms of origin, physical assessments, all recorded in official Roman archives. The historian Cassius Dio references these records multiple times. He describes them as marriage registers of conquest, lists of conquered royal women available for marriage to Roman commanders and senators. This wasn't trafficking in the modern sense. This was something the Romans considered completely legitimate. Systematic integration of conquered nobility through forced marriage. Act 4. The assignment. If the woman passed the examination, she would be presented with what the Romans called a sponsalia coctus, a forced betrothal. She wouldn't be sold. She would be married to a Roman commander, or a senator, or a wealthy patrician who had political connections. The marriage would be legal under Roman law. It would be recorded in official documents. Children from the marriage would be legitimate Roman citizens, but the woman had no choice. Refuse, and you'd be sold into slavery. Accept, and you'd be forced into marriage with a man who conquered your kingdom and likely killed your family. Livy records a specific case from 168 before Christ. After the conquest of Macedonia, the daughter of King Perseus, a 16-year-old named Philippa, was selected and assigned to a Roman senator named Quintus Marcius. She refused the betrothal. She stood before the triumvirate and said no. The commissioners had her stripped and beaten in front of the other selected women. Then they asked again. She refused again. So they changed tactics. They brought in her younger sister, 13 years old, and told Philippa that if she didn't accept the marriage, her sister would be sent to the public slave markets instead of given a marriage assignment. Philippa accepted. She married Quintus Marcius 3 days later. According to Livy, she never spoke to her husband. Not once in 15 years of marriages. She bore him 2 sons and a daughter, and she never spoke a word to him. She died at 31 years old. The official cause was recorded as melancholia, what we call severe depression today. Think about the cruelty of that choice. Refuse and condemn your sister to worse. Accept and condemn yourself to a lifetime with your family's destroyer. That's not accidental. That's designed to break you psychologically while maintaining Roman legal fiction of legitimate marriage. Act 5. The system's purpose. Here's the question nobody asks. Why did Rome do this? They had plenty of slaves. They had concubines. They had brothels. Why create this elaborate system specifically for conquered royal daughters? The answer is documented in multiple sources, but it's Senator Cicero who states it most clearly in a speech from 63 before Christ. He's arguing in favor of continuing the policy. He says, "When we marry the daughters of kings, we don't just conquer kingdoms, we absorb them. Their royal blood mixes with Roman blood. Their children are Romans' blood. And in one generation, the conquered kingdom is forgotten, replaced by loyalty to Rome." This was social engineering, genetic conquest, systematic elimination of royal bloodlines by absorbing them into Roman families. The daughters weren't just prizes, they were tools for erasing entire dynasties, and it worked. Historians can trace dozens of prominent Roman families whose bloodlines include conquered royal women: the Julii, the Cornelii, the Claudii, the Claudii. Julius Caesar himself was descended from a Sabine princess who was forcibly married to a Roman general in the 5th century BC. The machine didn't just destroy individuals, it destroyed the memory of entire kingdoms by converting their royal bloodlines into Roman lineages. If this moment in history doesn't move you to understand how systematic conquest actually worked, you might be missing the lesson our ancestors paid for with their dignity. Let me show you the scale. Between 241 before Christ and 476 after Christ, roughly 700 years, Roman sources document triumphs for at least 350 different conquests. If even half of those triumphs included the Sponsalia Victoriae process, and if even 10 women per conquest were processed through the system, that's roughly 1750 conquered royal daughters forced into Roman marriages. That's not counting the ones who were rejected and sold into slavery instead, or the ones who died during the examination process, or the ones who took their own lives rather than submit. The actual number is probably much higher, but even the conservative estimate represents nearly 2 millennia of documented systematic forced marriage as conquest policy. And here's what haunts me about this story. It was legal. It was celebrated. Poets wrote about these marriages as romantic victories. Historians recorded them as diplomatic triumphs. Nobody called it what it was: systematic abuse disguised as marriages. Conquest disguised as romance. The final assessment, what happened to these women after marriage, is documented in fragments. Some sources survive. Most don't. Philippa, the Macedonian princess who refused to speak, left a single documented statement. It was found carved into a wall in the villa where she lived. In Greek it says, "I am the daughter of Perseus. I am the sister of Alexander. I am the wife of no one." She lived 15 years in that villa. She bore 3 children. She fulfilled every legal requirement of a Roman wife, but she never accepted it. She never broke. And that single statement, carved where her husband would see it every day, was her resistance. Her way of saying, "You can force my body into your family. You can make my children Romans, but you cannot make me forget who I am. Archaeological evidence suggests she wasn't alone. Across the empire, in villas where conquered royal women were forced to live, researchers have found similar inscriptions, names, kingdoms, assertions of identity. These women couldn't fight with weapons. They couldn't refuse outright without condemning others, but they could carve their names into stone and refuse to be forgotten. Here's what should keep you awake tonight. This system worked. Rome used it for 700 years. It absorbed dozens of kingdoms and erased entire royal dynasties. And it worked because it was presented as legitimate. As marriage, not conquest. As honor, not abuse. The women were forced to participate in the destruction of their own legacies. Their children were Romans. Their grandchildren forgot where they came from. Within 2 generations, conquered kingdoms were remembered only as footnotes in Roman histories. The descendants of conquered royalty became loyal Roman citizens who celebrated the very triumphs that destroyed their ancestors. That's the genius of the machine. It didn't just conquer kingdoms. It made the conquered complicit in erasing their own history. The modern question, so what do we do with this story? How do we process the fact that one of history's greatest civilizations built a 700-year system of forced marriage and called it diplomacy? Here's what we don't do. We don't look away. We don't dismiss it as different times. We don't soften it by calling it strategic marriage. We call it what it was: systematic sexual violence disguised as law, conquest disguised as civilization. And we remember the names that were carved into stone: Philippa, Berenice, Arsino, Roxana, the hundreds of others whose names we'll never know, because the only power they had left was the power to say, "I remember who I was. You cannot erase me." The Atrium Vestae still stands in Rome. Tourists walk past it every day without knowing what happened there. The chambers where conquered royal daughters were examined are now storage rooms for archaeological equipment. There's no plaque, no memorial, no acknowledgement that this place was the center of a systematic process that destroyed thousands of lives over 7 centuries, but the scratches in the stone are still there, names and ages in languages that Rome tried to erase. And as long as those names survive, the women who carved them haven't been completely forgotten. If this exposed something you've never heard before, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're going to keep uncovering the history they tried to bury in footnotes and forgotten archives. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next investigation.